Normally I get up here and I'll make some presentation about archaeology or new work that we've done on the trail and that sort of thing. And I thought maybe this time we'd take a different look at things. I've been working for the past few months on a project. It's an interactive, community-based mapping project with the Eastern Band. And the name of our project is Judaculla Rock, which is just a way of saying ancient Cherokee, the ancient Cherokee world, and the ancient Cherokee place. It's a term that's used not so much in North Carolina as it's used out west, and it's just a way of saying the old country. What existed before folks came out to Oklahoma, where was home for Cherokee people. So what I wanted to do is explore a little bit of that concept of Judaculla Rock, ancient Cherokee, and what that means, but also look at what it was that people left behind here. We all know about, we talk constantly about, well, this person had this plantation, they had this ferry, and they had all of this stuff. In some ways, you can replace stuff. You can always get more if you're fortunate enough. You can get more stuff, but there are things you can't replace. There are things that had to be left behind here in the East that could not be replaced. They could not be substituted. And that is one impact of the forced removal, I think, that we often don't take into account. And let's look at that a little bit. When we talk about Judaculla Rock, one more time, see, this would work better if I had a remote. We might be talking about all of the territory that people had occupied for hundreds of years, where the homes actually were, stretching all the way up from Virginia down into Georgia and Alabama. Or, click again, we might just be talking about that area up in the mountains, up in that mountain highland, and back up one. Or we might be talking about that area in North Carolina, which is people in Oklahoma often called North Carolina Judaculla Rock, ancient Cherokee place. And those highlands up there, the highest mountains of all. Okay. So the first concept that I'd like to explore is there was a lot of rhetoric, a lot of talk, a lot of speeches that were recorded. People all through time, Cherokee leaders would talk about the graves of our grandmothers and our grandfathers. So these are memorials that were published in the Cherokee Phoenix, and they came out in 1828 and 1829 as statements in principle against the whole concept of removal. And they come from those people right in the middle of the Sequoyah district, right in the heart of the Judaculla Rock. And one thing they include in every statement as they do that, this first one says, our old men say they have fully determined to have their bones laid in these mountains. And then at the next slide, that they wish to lay their bones and desire at their latest posterity may venerate and guard their dust. And then finally, the bones of our fathers lie here in security, and we cannot consent to abandon them to be crushed beneath the feet of strangers. Now, this is not just, even though as important as that is, understanding that the graves of your people are very important. It goes beyond that. That concept of the way that we're attached to the graves of our ancestors. And when we go decorate a cemetery or memorialize our ancestors that way. Because for Native people, in traditional law, traditional belief, it is in fact the graves of your ancestors in a place that constitute evidence of your title. That's your title to the place. Your ancestors, for however many generations, are there. That demonstrates the legitimacy of your place, the legitimacy of your claim to that place. And one thing we see, one statement made was, our grandmothers and grandfathers do not rest there, meaning in Oklahoma. It is in fact someone else's land. So just at a very basic level, the idea that these people are not only rest in the land, but they're installed there, that their presence constitutes a legal document, a legal tenure. And I think that that's an important stage. That's at the most obvious level, that the Judaculla Rock is important because this is the place where the ancient claims exist. Also, back at the time that there was a revitalistic movement going on in the Cherokee Nation, we see this statement as part of what was called the Rocky Mountain Prophecy or Rocky Mountain Vision. And here, this messenger, a messenger from God, told Cherokee folk that God is dissatisfied you're receiving white people into your land, but primarily, if you click that, see that you get back from them your old beloved towns. And by that they meant all of the old mother towns, the places that were important because that's where the fires were set down. That's where the flames that were the very soul of the towns existed, and the places that sent their fires out to these other settlements existed in these old mother towns, and one by one these towns were being lost in different sessions, and they were alienated then from the Cherokee people. And the flames still existed down in the mounds and in the ground in the townhouses in these places. So there was a living link in terms of the living fire in these old towns. And they needed to be regained and brought back, because that, once again, was something that associated you, that associated your community and your town, not only with the land, but with God. And that formed the active link between there. So if you were taken away from these places and you no longer had access to these places, you were taken away from that link, that active link between you and the land and God above. Okay. The foremost of these places, as you all probably know, was Judaculla. Judaculla, where the first fire was brought down from the top of Clingman's Dome, where it was given by an emissary from God, an emissary from the Creator, to 7 men to bring down and introduce, put on the ground in an act that creates the Anthropology, the Cherokee people, the people of Judaculla. So this is the foremost of the mother towns. And it remains, even today, central in Cherokee traditional belief. We see it as a center for stomp dance movement, here with Redbird Smith. And folks know that that fire still exists down in that mound out there in between Cherokee and Bryson City. Okay. That's tangible. We can see those things. We can go to the very places where the grandmothers and grandfathers are buried. We know they're in the old towns. We can go, we can see the mounds. We know where the fire sleeps there. But there are other parts of the world that are unseen. So the places where the immortals live. Because, of course, we see everyone on this world, on this side of the surface. But there's whole races of immortals, parallel to Cherokee people, but who live forever, who live in the hidden places, in the high mountains, under the water. And these are your relatives. These are your relatives that never die. And if you're forced away, you're forced to leave those relatives behind. Places like the Untitled townhouses, like Niquosi. There's a story about when Niquosi was attacked and there were no men around to defend it. A door opens in the side of the mound. And the Untitled come rushing out to defend Niquosi and to save that town. So they're always there to help. They're always there to take care of the land and the people. Think what it means to have to leave those people behind. Okay. Places like August Dogi, and we're going to find out in a minute if our audio works or not here. This is a kiosk that we're about to install at Lake Chatu. But this was a town where sometime in the 1600s, the immortals came to the people of that town and said, there are trying times coming. And if you will fast in your townhouse for 7 days and not raise up the shout, then we will take you to live with us and you will become immortal and you can come down into the river. So they did that, and they entered the river in a whirlpool right outside their town, and they walked down in the water and joined the immortals. They're still there. They say that if it's a real still day, that you can hear them singing and dancing. Now this is under Lake Chetu, TVA's Lake Chetu, but the town is still there. It was still there at the time of removal when people went before the soldiers arrested them to say goodbye to their relatives that they knew were still there and still alive, and that they would never be able to visit with again once they were taken away. Click that. I'm sorry, we don't have the speakers. Okay, we'll click on through that. But if you visit Lake Chetu, you can walk up to this sign, you can scan that QR code, and you'll hear the story in the Cherokee language. So one thing we're trying to do is to try to put that perspective on the landscape. Or places associated with the great beings in the first stories. Places like Judaculla Rock. Judaculla Rock is just a couple of miles out from Cullowhee, where I live now. And this is a giant petroglyph, probably the most complex petroglyph in the East. The stories say were created by the giant being Judaculla, that we would say Judaculla in English. That when he leapt off the top of the mountain, he left his handprint on the rock. And you can see there's his handprint with all 6 fingers, 2 thumbs. This guy could text like the wind. But who was Judaculla? Judaculla was the first being, the first human-like being on the land there. And he was put in charge by the Creator. He was put in charge of the natural world. He was the steward of birds and mammals and fish. He was to take care of them and help them and make sure that the world worked in order. And when the first people show up, Judaculla undertakes to teach them so that they can live in this world, live in this place. And then he had to leave because he couldn't really tolerate being around all these people because we mess up all the time. But before he left, Judaculla, let me click it. And we'll bypass this because you can't hear the sound, but we have a really nice video clip here of Tom Belt telling us in Cherokee about Judaculla. Before Judaculla leaves, he instructs us all in the language of birds and fish and animals so that they can teach us how to take care of this place and how to help. And of course, we forgot, but so Judaculla is this intermediary between the Creator and us to teach us how to live in this place. And we see that the landscape in the mountains of North Carolina, in the old Judaculla, back up, you're getting to my funny part. It's just covered in places associated with this being. So all of these places are associated with this great being who is related to the thunder beings and the beings of the world above. His residence is on the top of the Balsam Mountains. It's covered with places like, they call it Devil's Courthouse now, but it's actually Judaculla's council house. There's Judaculla Fields. There's Judaculla Mountain. The whole landscape is covered in this place. And these were places that were very tangible for the people who lived there. This was a network of meaning for Cherokee people in that place. And it's what connected them to this world and this place so vastly in such an intimate manner that it's very difficult, I think, for us to even imagine this at this point. They could not be separated from those elements of the unseen world and the natural world because it's a system that evolved over thousands of years. And to remove people from that system is like removing a limb. So these are the places associated with Judaculla, all the way out to Murphy, all the way out to Robbinsville, all up on the top of the Balsam Mountains, and places like this one. This is a map that James Mooney made in the 1880s from Cherokee informants who were telling him about these different places. And here's this place outside Bryson City, which is actually translates as where Judaculla urinated on a yellow rock in the river that has a big hole in it where, you can imagine if you're a powerful spirit being and a giant, you're going to make rocks yellow and knock big holes in them when you stop and do that. But he's all over the landscape. And in some ways, he's the relation of the people who follow him. He's like the father figure or the grandfather. And all these places, when you go there, you're reminded of Judaculla and what he tells us to do in this world. Okay. Even down on the Hiwassee River, we see Judaculla, a boulder in the middle of the river. He raises his hand so that we can see who he is, so we don't forget him, so we don't forget that he's part of this place and the people who are part of this place. He raises that six-fingered hand to tell you, I just sent you a text message, guys. But this is part of a larger panel where Judaculla is at the top, overseeing everything that goes on. Above, thunder, powerful being with wings and a bow. And beneath him are the horned serpents, Dokdanen, that come from the world beneath. So here we see a place where the three worlds come together, where they intersect, where the veil is thin, a place where the people who live in this world can access the beings of that world and the beings of that world. It is one of the most powerful places in the Cherokee world. But the Cherokee world is filled with those places. If you're 1,000 miles away, you can't get to this. You can't come back to it. Following up on that next thing, Ukdana, the horned serpent, they're all over this landscape. This is again the link to the world beneath, the lords of the beneath world. These horned serpents, like giant 80-foot long rattlesnakes with horns, the things that inhabit your nightmares. But they're also like people. They can also be in human form, and they can speak to you, and while they're scary and dangerous, they can also help you. There's the story about the Cherokee Warrior who was pursued by the enemy, came to the river, thought he would either drown or be killed, and Ukdana came up and said, "Ride on my back." Rides him across the river, takes him away from his enemies. So these are, again, unseen beings that only appear every once in a while to us, but they can help us. So there are Ukdana places all over that area. Places where, again, the veil between the worlds is thin. Places where people came back from Oklahoma to visit as late as the 1920s to access these places and understand them. The river there is full of marks made by the Ukdana, claw marks on the rocks, and the spirals that turn, indicating beneath world. Even the place where the dogs are speaking to the Ukdana, right there in the Hiwassee. So the last part, I want to talk about, well, how do you restore the Jalagi Uad? People are taken away. People are ripped from this landscape. And so physically that restoration is difficult. But it may be that conceptually we could begin that process of restoration, begin that process of trying to heal that separation. Okay. So the Eastern Band actually has a program. Would you hit? Just keep hitting those. Of trying to reacquire the old town places, the places where the flames are still there in the ground, and to try to preserve other town places. So this is a very direct, very physical way of restoring the Judaculla. We can put interpretation out so that at least people are aware that this landscape exists, that this is indeed a Cherokee place that you're in. This is a sign that's going to go on the campus at Western Carolina, because there was an old mound out there, no longer there. The Killian Education Building is there where it was. But we want people to know not only was this mound here, but what this place was and what it meant. Also, to understand that they are there at Cullowhee in Judaculla, in Judaculla's place. You're in the place of the great teacher, and that's why your university is here. And then finally, this initiative that we're trying to start to map traditional landscapes, to have this as a community-based interactive mapping project. So this will be accessible to members of the Eastern Band, who will use the story maps that we were hearing about earlier today as a base to be able to record and make accessible family stories about place, and to bring together all the different media that you could put in there. We started with a workshop this past summer where we used the base maps that James Mooney took around in 1888. It turns out that all the stories he recorded on the maps. He marked places on the maps, he turned them around, he wrote the notes down. So we had those scanned at the National Anthropological Archives and brought them into a session with community members, mostly first language speakers, to begin to examine these places and try to understand what it was that people were telling James Mooney in the 1880s. You can see his notes there. Really strange orthography, kind of hard to read the Cherokee words, but we parsed these out in this workshop. And created sort of a prototype using story maps where we talked about particular places on the landscape, like Mingus Mill, which was not a Cherokee place originally, but became a Cherokee place through association. Okay. And we won't try the audio clips there. Or even Wallace's place, Wallace Bradley, the progenitor of about half of the Eastern Band. And we've progressed here. I'll show you. We're regressing here. We're going to get a little bit of audio maybe. Click. Click. Hang on just a second. Back up. Back up. Now, whoa. Go forward one. See that yellow triangle up there in the center of the map? Click that. And click that player. It's Leroy Littlejohn telling us about Wallace's place. Wallachie, where old Wallace lived, Wallace Bradley. And he's telling us this Cherokee narrative about this place where the Bradley family came from. It's a wonderful story, and take my word for it. But he also says how when you're in the park, this is in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, when you're there and you go to Mingus Mill and you walk the path back to Mingus Mill, you're actually walking over old Wallace. They buried him there. And under the gravel pathway, if you're there in the morning when the dew's drying off, you can see a rectangle that's still holding moisture. And that's Wallace Bradley there. So he tells that whole story. We also had another story that came out, Janie Brown was telling about. To back up, what we encourage people to do is look at not just at stories about Judaculla and Odena and all these great beings from the remote past, but look at the stories that define Cherokee today or in the recent past. And Janie Brown told about when Hank Williams came to Cherokee, telling the story in Cherokee language. The real Hank Williams Sr. and how she got to go hear the concert and was walking along with 2 lanterns and walked past. If you've been to Cherokee, you know the island park with the picnic tables, and at one time they had trees that talked to you down there. It used to be called Goat Island. There were a big herd of goats there, and how the goats came off the island and followed her to the Hank Williams concert. It was a great story in Cherokee, but we want to capture all of that experience through this project, all of that.